Hello everyone, my name is Alfio Zambon and I work at Universidad Nacional de la Patagonia, San Juan Bosco. The title of this presentation is The Dual Dimension of Elements as Basic Substances. I would like to start by saying that the following is a work in progress. In classical philosophy, elements were conceived from a metaphysical perspective as those simple things from which everything else was made. This idea entered chemistry through alchemy, but it was with Lavoisier that the concept of element acquired an operational definition as those substances into which we are capable, by any means, to reduce bodies by decomposition. However, Mendeleev recovered the metaphysical dimension of the concept of element by distinguishing between simple substance, which can be isolated and has observable properties, and basic substance or element, which is the bearer of non-observable properties. He endowed the basic substance with at least one attribute, its atomic weight. This was used as a criterion to order elements in the periodic system. With the great advance of quantum physics at the beginning of the 20th century, the atomic theory was consolidated in the field of chemistry, and the concept of element began to be assimilated to that of atom. However, after the discovery of isotopes by Scerri in 1913, elements seemed to multiply, and the doubt about whether or not isotopes were new elements unleashed the so-called crisis of the periodic table. It is in the context of this crisis that Friedrich Paneth takes up the dual nature of the element concept, differentiating between elements as simple substances according to their phenomenological manifestations and elements considered in an abstract sense as basic substances, to which we gave them as their only property, instead of their atomic weight, as Mendeleev proposed, their atomic number, in accordance with the new quantum mechanics. For Paneth, they are not two descriptions of the same entity, resulting from an epistemic limitation to be overcome in the future by better knowledge. According to the author, the concept of a chemical element presents in itself a double nature. Paneth's work has been widely discussed in the field of the philosophy of chemistry. In this presentation, I will focus on a very interesting observation made by Professor Scerri, which I will quote. Paneth insisted that the periodic system only classifies elements as basic substances. From that perspective, it is difficult to understand how the elements can provide some indication of the second dimension of the periodic table, that is, the grouping of elements in vertical columns. Scerri, 2012. In this presentation, I will propose a way to overcome the obstacle pointed out by Scerri by specifying and enriching the notion of basic substance. This proposal is in its embryonic development, but I will try to argue that it is plausible as a proposal. In this sense, I will return to Paneth's proposal that the reactions between elements as basic substances can be considered a priori and transcendental structures, and that they are prior to empirical experiences and can be considered as their foundations. In this interesting quote from Paneth, it is possible to interpret his conception of the basic substance and the possibility of interpreting reactivity in this way when he appeals to the Greek mythology of the god Proteus, who produces innumerable forms but subject to rigid laws. The expression "it is just the task of chemistry to discover the laws of this transcendental world" is curious. In this work, I will start from a free inspiration of Kantian philosophy, following Paneth's reading of Kant. Paneth: it is not my intention to discuss about the theoretical aspects of Kantian philosophy, but only to present a possible way to overcome the obstacle pointed out by Professor Scerri. In the Kantian framework, the subject always perceives from the a priori forms of sensibility, space, and time. Nevertheless, thought can abstract one from the other, and this is very relevant for the objective of the present work. The central idea is that the concept of element as a basic substance can be conceived in two logical steps. First, from an atemporal perspective by abstracting time. Second, by reintroducing the temporal dimension. In addition to its property, atomic number, the reactions in which an element participates are essential to it. All the reactions between elements from a space of relationships where time has been abstracted. It is important to stress that I am not speaking of the reactions actually observed in the laboratory, but of all of the possible reactions of the transcendental world to which Paneth referred. From this perspective, each element is a node in a network of relationships constituted by all possible chemical reactions. Considering an element in isolation lacks chemical meaning. It is possible to draw an analogy with Saussure's conception of language, according to which each particular word acquires meaning only within the network of relations it maintains with other words. This perspective adds a relational aspect to the very essence of element as a basic substance. To try to convey the idea, we can start from binary combination, in which two elements combine with each other in a definite number of possible interactions. Then, each of the compounds can combine with other elements. In this way, a network of interactions is generated. This network is enormously large and complex, but finite, and in principle knowable. This idea can be represented by means of interaction diagrams. In this slide, I show the general construction strategy of the interaction diagrams, a general example. And I also show two particular examples, the reactions of two elements belonging to the halogen group, chlorine and bromine, with oxygen. In this slide, I show the oxidation reaction of hydrogen bromide represented by an interaction diagram. If each element is thought of as a node to which its possible reactions converge, it is clear that elements with similar reaction patterns behave similarly, that is, have similar reactivity, and then should be found in nearby places in the periodic table. Therefore, the incorporation of the relational nature of the concept of the element as a basic substance makes it possible to justify the ordering of the elements as basic substances in the periodic table in a second dimension. Reintroducing the temporal dimension is more natural for chemists, since in chemistry we represent reactions by means of a graph of an energy variable and the reaction coordinate, or development of the reaction in time, In this way, it is traditionally shown how reactants are transformed into products. Another strategy to reintroduce the temporal dimension could be the addition of thermodynamic variables such as the variation of enthalpy and the variation on Gibbs free energy to the interaction diagrams. In this way, relevant temporal information can be obtained. For instance, the direction of the reaction, whether there is a state of equilibrium, the energy involved in the reaction, etc. This strategy is still under development. Final remarks. I started from Paneth's dual conception of chemical elements, but stressing Scerri's criticism. The concept of basic substance is insufficient to organize the elements in the periodic table. In this work, I propose to enrich the notion of basic substance by adding a relational dimension. According to the relational dimension, elements as basic substances are nodes in the network of the relations established by all the possible chemical reactions. The idea is that this enriched notion of basic substance counts with the necessary resources to organize the elements in the groups of the periodic table. Thank you very much for your attention, and I leave you to a very interesting quote taken from the poem Proteo by Jorge Luis Borges.